Okay, so, and with that, I'll invite us to prayer. Gracious and wonderful God, we thank you for blessing us with minds and hearts, with will, with agency, with the ability to receive and to give love. Lord, let this be a time of trust, a time of openness, a time of learning and grace, but always a time for building trust in you. In Jesus' name. Amen. And God bless Larry.
Yes.
It's in the freezer.
I'm making green soup for Paolo, and Chris had a hand.
All right, so to maybe recap a little bit, everyone was here last time. I don't think anybody knows. So, and the recording didn't work as far as people hearing Barry Johnson. So on the video, and we've had a couple of people watch the video, I put the link to the Barry Johnson video to get it directly. So if anybody needs to get that. Remember we talked first about how a problem can be solved. And then usually in a problem you have two or more options or avenues or something that forces you to make a decision. And when you decide, then problem solved. Even if you make the wrong choice. I mean, God goes with you in that, and then you have new choices come up. But that's how problems work. But then sometimes we run into situations where we think we have a problem, but instead we are trying to manage between two polarities of an energy system that are interdependent pairs, and we may happen to be in tune with one and not in tune with the other, and so when we see the other taking prominence, we become concerned, and it seems like a problem. So I don't remember, the last time we talked about inhaling, exhaling, and we talked in the upside of, in this very short cycle, the upside of inhaling, but the downside of continuing to inhale and not stopping, and then versus the upside of exhale, which is the natural progression. If you follow around from inhaling, then we have the upside of exhaling, but then if you don't inhale, you have trouble. Then we did a 24-hour cycle of activity and rest. It's not an either or, it's a both and if it's out of balance in different ways, it can lead to difficulty or problems, but if it's managed, it can be leveraged to the best of our ability and to the greatest advantage. No one's talking about perfection, but it's never an either or with the polarity. So Barry Johnson, I love that this whole video is, you could see it as being totally secular, totally removed from any kind of religious piece. It's Roy Oswald, his co-author, that is the church consultant. Barry Johnson is the polarities guru, but they got together. So in Barry's consulting work, oftentimes he will go to places where they're not talking about faith or religion really at all, although you saw that even in Barry's work, when you start to see the other people in the system, it's all about love and inclusion. So I think that's wonderful. So I'm going to show you an example of a polarity he worked with a Fortune 25 company. And it's not anything you have to remember the details of, but it might stir, if you're like me, it'll get your cogs spinning about, oh, so that's how you can actually get people to open their eyes to something or see why they're stuck or start to see a way forward. So I think it's really useful. So we'll watch that portion of the video. We'll pause for questions and thoughts. Then in the question and answer session that we watched part of last time, there's a couple that spoke to him, and they talked about how, I can't remember their question, but it got into a polarity of justice and mercy. And I thought that would be, so we'll watch that as well. And if we have time and energy and willingness, we might, there are several polarities that apply to churches, and we can pick one and kind of do our own. So. All right, so any questions, any thoughts, cautions, warnings? Okay. So, and according to Shayla, the sound was working. Again, Shayla, give me a thumbs up when you start to hear the speaker, so I know that it's going okay. All right. It's going to pick up a little before that discussion, but I don't want to miss it, so here we go.
The objective is to maximize both upsides by minimizing the downsides. That will help you run a marathon, and you do it by your action steps and moving. So that's the essence of how polarities look and work and how you leverage them. So now I want to introduce you to our small process for seeing and leveraging polarities, and then we're going to share a case study, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. So we call it the small process for leveraging polarities. And the SMALL stands for seeing. First, you need to see that it is a polarity. Oh, this is one of those interdependent pairs. Next, you need to map. If it is a polarity, it will have two upsides and two downsides, and you can identify a greater purpose and a deeper fear as to respond to why manage it well. Once you have created content, then you can assess it. How well are we doing at getting both upsides and minimizing both downsides to lift it toward this greater purpose? Then you can do is you can learn from that assessment, and that supports you in the leveraging, which is to create action steps for each upside and early warnings for each downside. And every step of the way, you need to engage key stakeholders. They'll help you identify which polarities are most important, help you identify the upsides and downsides, help you assess how well you're doing, and help you think about action steps and early warnings. So that's our process. So I'd like to share with you now a situation that we ran into a number of years ago where I was on the phone. I'd like you to imagine you're with me now, and you're on the phone with it's a multinational organization. It's located in 46 countries. It's a Fortune 25 company in the United States. And you're on the phone with them, and in the conversation you're having with them, you're helping them design a half a day on polarity thinking, because they're bringing their top 200 people from around the world together for a leadership sort of acknowledgement, a celebration of they've had a really good year and they want to celebrate that, and they want to incorporate in the celebration some leadership development opportunities. So you're going to spend a half a day with them on polarity thinking. So you're talking with the chief operating officer, the chief learning officer for the company, and the head of the design team that is preparing this leadership development week. And in the beginning of the conversation, one of the things they say is, our theme for this gathering. And the theme is leading through values. And my response to them is, well, that's terrific, because values tend to come in pairs. And so if you're looking at leadership, we can look at values and values pairs, and it'll be a great combination of this theme and polarity thinking. And the chief operating officer says, wait a minute, are you saying that values come in pairs? And I said, yes, sir. So if I'm working with an organization and they're just starting to create their values, I encourage them to look at values pairs and lay them that way in the first place. If they have a list of values and they don't have them in pairs, I look with them at their values, and we see if in their list of values, if they have one value in the list and its interdependent pairs also in the list. If so, I encourage them to put them as a pair. And if they have a value that doesn't have a pair in the list, I encourage them to just add that value pair in order to make sure that they're not vulnerable to just focusing on one pole of the polarity. So the chief operating officer says, wait a minute. If you're going to be talking about our values, in front of our top 200 people. I want to know what you would do with them. And he said, I'm going to send you our values right now. Here's our values. So he sent me the values, and he said, okay, Barry, this is our values. Now, what do you think? So one of the values that showed up was autonomous business units. Now, if you're located in 46 countries, you need to have some autonomy for your business units, clearly. Even if you're only located in one country, your business units need some degree of autonomy to be effective. So I wanted to give them a competitive advantage by looking at their values list through a polarity lens. So I have this greater purpose up here, and down here the deeper fears can't compete. So what I'd like your help with now is, again, 5 seconds per quadrant in the chat room. I'd like you to help me fill out this polarity map. We're just going to do 5 seconds in each quadrant. So when he asked me what I made of his autonomous business units, I said, well, what I was looking for is some value that would be an interdependency to autonomous business units that would make sure that they were not vulnerable to an overfocus on autonomous business units, some balancing sister pole. What would I be looking for? In the chat room, 5 seconds, what would, and I'm not looking for sort of just one correct word or phrase, but what kind of word would you be looking for? What kind of focus would be necessary to keep autonomous business units from becoming dysfunctional? What would balance it out? 5 seconds in the chat room. What comes to mind?
Okay, collaboration, coordination, centralized, collective.
Yes, exactly. So, what I put is integrated, but everything was coordinated, centralized, coordinated, integrated, etc. So they had nothing like that. They didn't have any of the words that you just mentioned, right? So I said to them, I notice you have autonomous business, but you don't have anything like integrated business units or coordinated or centralized. And of course, it wasn't there. It was easy to see. They only had, about 5 or 6 values on the list, and none of those showed up. So, and they looked and they said, right, it's not there. So what do you make of that? And I said, well, from what I know about polarities now, and what you know from what I just said in the summary, there are going to be negative results from over-focusing on autonomous business units to the neglect of integrated business units because they don't have integrated or centralized there. So you tell me, I said this organization is experiencing or will experience the following dysfunction. What are those dysfunctions? 5 seconds, go. Over-focus on autonomous business units to the neglect of centralized, coordinated, integrated business units.
Misalignment, chaos, inefficiency.
Yep. Exactly. I ended up with a longer list, but exactly what you said. You're going to have silos, isolation business units, excess competition, inefficiencies. Exactly. So I said to them, your organization is experiencing or will experience these silos, isolation business units, excess competition, and the items that you mentioned. So I said at some point, you're going to identify this as a problem. When you do, you're going to bring your business unit heads together with your executive team, and you're going to decide how to solve that problem. Now, what they will be doing in their solution is they will be going after the benefit of integrated business units or centralized coordination. But they won't, they're just looking at the problem of the solution. I said, you're going to come up with some things you're going to agree that you want to do to solve the problem of the silos and excess competition. What are the things they say they're going to go towards, which will be the upside of integrated business units? What are those upsides that they're going to say they're going to move towards? 5 seconds, go.
Living together, communication, unified mission, synergies.
Yep. Exactly. So what we've got here is from silos and isolated competition, integration of business units, collaboration, mutual support, synergies, communication, everything you said. They were going to meet and they're going to agree to do that. So as I continue on the phone with them, I said, you're going to agree, everybody's going to agree that that's where you want to go, and then you're not going to go there. Now, there's silence on the end of the phone, and I wait for a few moments in the silence, and I finally say hello, and a gruff voice comes back. It's the chief operating officer, and he says to me, "Who have you been talking to?" And I say, "I haven't been talking with anybody. I just understand how values work and how polarities work, and so this is very predictable." And he said, "Wait a minute. I understand how from our autonomous business units you come up with the silos and the excess competition, lack of coordination, etc. And I understand how you come up with the integration and the collaboration and centralized coordination, etc. How you come up with those things. But did I hear you correctly when you said we're not going to walk our talk?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I said, "Well, I want to know how you knew that, because I had this conversation 2 years ago with all the business unit heads and the administration, and we agreed to the person, and unions supported it. Everybody agreed that that's where we're going to go, but we've hardly moved an inch in 2 years. I want to know, this is costing us millions. I want to know how you knew we weren't going to walk our talk when we all agreed to do it." And I said to them, "Well, that's why I'm coming to spend a half a day with you and the top 200. But essentially, this is what I was aware of, is that they are likely to see this as a problem with a solution, and they were likely to use gap analysis, in which they see this is the problem with the present state, and we need to bridge the gap by going to this future state solution. What would be missing from a polarity perspective is that there's an upside of autonomous business units that they value, and they're afraid they're going to lose it. So, what would be the positive result from doing a good job of allowing autonomous business, your autonomy for your business units if you're located in 46 countries? This is a key part of their culture that caused them to have autonomous business units in the first place. What are the positive results for autonomy of your business units? Go.
Activity, agility, speed, freedom.
Yep, exactly. Bingo, you got it. Okay, so speed, responsiveness, agility, entrepreneurial initiative, etc. Everything you said. Now, notice in the gap analysis process, with a problem and a solution, and assuming all we have to do is just have some action steps to support this upside, what's missing from a gap analysis is the upside of the pole you're moving from and the downside of the pole you're moving towards. So if you love entrepreneurial initiative and speed and responsiveness at 99 on the 100 scale, you're going to be afraid of losing it when you go to this pole. The fear of the downside was what was going to keep them from going after their upside. So, because this is what they want to avoid. The stronger they want to hold on to this, the more they want to avoid this. So now we have one more quadrant to fill out. So the question is, what would be the negative results if you over-focused on integrated business units to the neglect of autonomous business units? You can just put not in front of this and put it down here. What is this culture, not just individuals, but the whole culture, afraid would happen if they went to integrated business units? 5 seconds, go.
One size does not fit all, too much groupthink, herd mentality, making everything slow and stiff, Titanic, analysis paralysis.
Exactly. Wonderful. Now, so you'd be afraid of instead of entrepreneurial initiative, you'd have bureaucracy and red tape. Instead of speed and responsiveness, you'd be slow and unresponsive. And everything that you generated. I'd like to point out something here now. You generated, in a total of 20 seconds, the content for a polarity map, the ineffectiveness of which, the misdiagnosis of which, was costing a Fortune 25 company in the United States millions of dollars, actually a month, because they were unable to access the upside of this pole. So the wisdom is in you. You were able to come up with this content. All that was needed was for me to raise the question, if autonomous business units and integrated business units were a polarity, what would the upsides be? What would the downsides be? You gain that competitive advantage. You able to increase the speed and the sustainability of going after this pole. So, so that gave them a competitive advantage. So I want to share a little bit then. When I went to the half day we spent with them, all 200 people in the room from all over the world were in table groups of 6, and they generated this content fresh for themselves in each table group. And then I asked them, what would the action steps be? And they generated these action steps to make sure we hold on to entrepreneurial initiative and speed and responsiveness. And then, what are the action steps to make sure we have integration and collaboration? And then, what would early warnings be that would let us know we're heading towards bureaucracy and red tape or we're getting slower? And what would the early warnings be that we're getting into silos and excess competition, etc.? So they generated those maps, and that's how we supported them in being able to do both, have autonomous business units and integrated business units, and that gave them a competitive advantage with any organization that would see this as a problem solved. So, final key points. Every change effort is part of an infinity loop energy system, and polarity energy is at play. Having all the power and all the alignment in a change effort is not enough to overcome the misdiagnosis of treating a polarity as if it's a problem to solve. If you want to guarantee the failure of a change effort, just tie it to one pole of a polarity. It doesn't matter which pole. If you want success, tie it to both poles of a polarity. That polarity will always be available to leverage because polarities are indestructible. Okay, so let me stop sharing here and deal with some questions and insights.
Okay, I think that's the unit that I wanted us to focus on. So you can go home and say, my pastor thinks I'm elite in my understanding of things. He treats us like CEOs of a top 25, Fortune 25 company. So I'm guessing that.
Not.
Or there's another perspective?
I'm waiting for a clarification.
Oh, okay, please.
You know, what's relevant?
Okay,
We're not looking for business units.
exactly.
It's not in my perspective.
Okay.
Why?
Okay, so why would I do
Yeah.
this secular thing and say this was useful? And maybe it won't be, but if we can, I'll tie it forward. For example, let me jump to this set of how Roy Oswald sees this as something that churches can try to identify polarities, if there are some, and then if so, how can they manage them? So, very good. So let me go to the table of contents. There's about 8 of them here. And then we can decide later if we want to look at 1 or 2 of these. Okay, so in the church, can you imagine a polarity that has 2 values that are interdependent, tradition and innovation? And talking about what's the upsides of holding on to tradition, and what are the upsides of innovating, what are the downsides, and I believe I've seen that in churches as a tension, which that's one of the ways we've talked about polarities before, are tensions. So tradition and innovation could be one that a church might look at and say, are we managing this well? Are we tied to one side? Are we approaching it as a problem? Another one would be spiritual health as a value, but on the pole, institutional health. That may be a little bit harder for us to grasp, but maybe not. So that's one. Yes?
I really get the connection of where you're going, of how we could tie it into what's happening in a church life. The only thing that I have a question is I guess, even in education and everything, when you identify and you have a lot of, we call them dog and pony shows where they come and they
Sure.
share information. But is after you have your problems, your solutions, what do we hold on? What do we let go? How do we make it be? Excuse me.
Oh, that's fine.
It's my sister just for a second. How do we identify what the problems are and how do we avoid. Okay, after we put all that together on this graph and we talk, the big question in every aspect that I've ever been in is, okay, who does the assessing? Who carries out and does the follow through on the assessment without having biases, without perceptions being mixed up, and who becomes in the leadership that comes in and tells everybody else what to do. And then we're back to the holy cow survey that says, you know, you have great leadership, but be very careful. It's prominent, but don't forget your focus and where you're going. So how do we, that's what then we go back to last week. How do we make sure that we don't do the and or the or, and that we focus with the and we're working together and collaborating and making sure we're on the same journey going together.
And when is this taking place? After the committee works? After September?
You know what, I've known this now for 15 years, and I don't anticipate us standing up and doing polarity maps unless we really get into something. What I'm wanting to do is to absorb the principles so that we have a better understanding of when we get into these areas. Now, we could work a polarity map, but nobody's going to foist it on you. A couple of things as you were talking. Who decides the assessment? As you were hearing that, the key stakeholders. And in our case, that's every member. All right? We have leaders, we have members, we have attenders. Those are the key stakeholders. They help determine the values. They help determine what the upsides are. I mean, all of them. Now, and when you talked about, well, how are we going to deal with eliminating bias? When have we ever eliminated bias in our humans?
Never.
It's never going to happen. So instead, we leverage that reality. So Ethel's always going to be traditional, and she's always going to fight against the innovation. So rather than condemning her for her bias, we say, Ethel is going to be the one that helps us to map the upsides of holding on to tradition. And she's going to help us see the fears of if we lose our tradition, this is what could happen. So we need that perspective.
The balance.
So then once we get to a point of action steps, and again, I'm not looking to formally do this like at session or so forth, but I'm looking to your leaders that can, hey, action steps. These are the things, here are my values, you know, I might be seeing this. And in order to maintain a good balance of tradition, we need these action steps.
Well, if it would be okay to share, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in this was the and or discussion. In a recent meeting that took place, I thought it was probably one of the greatest meetings we've had, simply because I think that instead of having so many ors, we identified strengths, we stroked strengths, and with that, we collaborated and we met with a discussion, and it became a united front of not conformity. It wasn't about conformity. It was about listening to others speak and becoming a focus on what would be the best out the door for all of us. And I think that came from the and or discussion that we did last week, because, and it's not that it was up there going, oh, let's do and or. It was just the thought of, okay, and it wasn't about drawing the graph in the mind and, you know, seeing it visually what was happening. It was about just the natural talking subliminally, and it came about that it became a very productive. It wasn't about one person being right or wrong. Personalities were out of it. It was about the good of the order, the good of the church. What can we do to make us more effective, more productive? And that was cool, because all of a sudden it turned out it was like, wow, we really accomplished a lot. It was a feel good. Yeah.
After today, you may never see a polarity map again, and that's okay. I carry these principles in the back of my mind, so that when I start to, you know, if I'm finding myself digging in my heels, So what's that about? Or if I feel that there's resistance, I at least have the possibility of saying, are we getting into an area here? Do I need to be listening more rather than resisting these voices? And can I identify something? So these are just principles that now, but we may someday say, you know what? Let's work this process, but we may never come back to this again. But I think the principles behind it that help us to see the possibility of it and or and rather than or is useful. So, oh, hello, looking for the main group?
I'm sorry, it's Rosemary.
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
That was intimidating. Did they bring us any?
They go to the newsroom.
If they bring us any.
So hopefully, when we get into the idea of, well, if I like tradition, what are the action steps? You know, and then you can evaluate how's our church doing in that. And then if we're fear of losing our tradition, we can look at the warning signs. See, we've already gotten into this, you know, and there can be warning signs. And innovation. What are the action steps to stay current? What are the fears of not being innovative? And so then you can develop action steps or warning signs. May be useful for us in that polarity, may not. Let me list some other ones to see if there are any that go with us. The one that I read about last night was in-reach and outreach. This, I think, is, I think it's incumbent upon every church to have these values. We need to nurture and care for our members, in reach. That's how they're talking about that word. We need to exhibit the kingdom of God to the world. We need to put our faith into action. So I have seen in churches where at least the comments that you get when you do surveys like we did are, we're too focused on our belly button. You know, we're great at in reach, but what are we doing in the world? And when we did Revelation and those letters to each of the churches, it's that same thing. It was kind of that feedback of, well, yeah, you've got this, but where's that? So churches that's going to happen in a church, in-reach versus outreach, whether they focus on it or not. That's always there. And nobody's going to balance it perfectly. But if you can try and leverage it upward toward, you know, if the greater value is exhibiting the kingdom of God to the world, and the lower portion is, you know, a country club or whatever, or an ineffective organization, you're trying to manage the upsides of, yeah, we do in-reach by these action steps, but if we start to over-focus on in-reach, then we know these warning signs, so we need to go to balance with our outreach.
So what would it be called if it was in the church and there's the fear, and fear is a really negative word, cross that out. There was a thought, concern, thank you, Joanne. There might be a concern of the members who have been members forever, you know, a long time, and how do you deal, not how to deal, that's bad too, isn't it? How do you welcome, navigate newness when maybe you're not wanting so much newness because you're the 200 people for Bob's and they were afraid that those 200 people are going to come in and take over. And how do you make sure that there's love and that there's a shared, this is our church and we want to do what you've done, make it stronger, make it as good as we can, but not to come in and be threatened, make a threat to where they will lose that sense of their ownership. And it's not about taking over their ownership at all. It's about, you know, we all bring our tap-in resources from our experiences and exposures, and it's certainly not the idea of coming in to take over. It's just to come in to share and do our part and try to be as helpful as possible. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh,
Yes,
sure.
absolutely.
My answer about how we're going to ensure that love is part of the process, imperfectly, with some frustration, with looking at putting the impetus on ourselves, showing love first, and hoping that that brings to the system.
Wanting to validate what traditions and different aspects of the church's history are still validated
Mhm.
and respected, but at the same time, if there's some new energy that comes in, that it's also welcomed. It's not, a intrusion. It's not upsetting the horse's cart. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Yes.
The thought I had when you said about people coming in and people feeling threatened, our church was that it's God's church. We need to keep our focus on the fact that this is God's church and everything we do here should be God's work. It shouldn't be self-serving. So that's just a thought that popped into my mind when you were talking.
That's a very good thought, because I think sometimes in many of the churches that we've been at, whenever there is a disruption of the congregations and they split, it all becomes human. If they have lost the focus. God, you're absolutely right.
Or sense of power.
Yeah, it is.
Control.
It does. That's the word.
Yeah.
That's where
So,
it becomes about which people are in control and which ones, and they don't want to share that control.
Yeah.
And that, I could see if there ever became an issue like that, that would be something that you'd like to sit down so that you save what we have and make sure that we're all going in the same direction and we have the same respect that it is God's church, not an individual or a group.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That brings to mind, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I was able to hear a preacher at a Synod School event, which I will explain what that is later, but it's a Presbyterian event. And wonderful worship at a college with a whole bunch of people from a lot of different states and churches. But it was still intimate. And the preacher, was talking about communion itself. Because think of the history of the church and the disagreements over communion. We have, I make it a point to say that we practice open communion. And I go to a fault in that, in saying you don't need to be a member. You follow Christ. That's not real. That's a little lenient. You need to be baptized. I don't check people's cards at the door. So technically, I'm on the let's err on the side of being open rather than closed. Then on the other side, and we have this in our history, they used to call it fencing the table. Right? And now think of this not as a problem, but as a polarity. Right? Open table, but eating and drinking worthily. Fenced table, Calvin and those that came after that, the elders of the church were basically the elders. And so they would, and it got into a situation, people still have these today, where the elders would do a regular visit with the members that they were assigned to. And have you been attending church? Are you giving? Do you do this? Are you praying? Do you read scripture? What are you doing with your kids? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's your communion token you can turn in to have communion. That's in our history. That's called fencing.
The Presbyterian history?
It's in the Reformed tradition and others.
Wow.
But yeah, you can go, and I've known people who have passed down in their generations of family, here's my communion token from my family. So now here's an over-focus on, well, we want to make sure people are committed and eating and drinking worthily. And so it can get, and all of you know the wisdom of the pendulum. Now, it seems to, once it gets to be, it'll swing back the other way. Well, in our history, we have both. And it probably with the polarity, we're not going to get the pendulum to stop. All right, but hopefully we can say, all right, there were reasons for that. I'm not comfortable on this side, I'm comfortable on this side, or vice versa. But communion has been an issue for churches and for the wider church for a long, long time. And hopefully I'll remember why I brought that up. So it was open communion or closed communion, if you will. And we have that very thing going on right now. I half my family, Missouri Synod Lutheran. Now, all right. Missouri Synod Lutheran, different than ELCA Lutheran, are closed communion. And I actually been close enough to a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor who I really resonated with in Kansas. I appreciated that. He explained, not to the point where I said, okay, we're going to do that too, but oh, okay, that's where they're coming from.
Understanding.
Yeah, there's scriptures that they talk about where you, if you're going to have the meal at the table, but not be in agreement with Christ or whatever, I can't articulate their position, but they have a rational position for that. And so that's what they hold to. So if I go to a Missouri Synod Lutheran church and if they let me in, I can't take communion. I'll respect that. I may disagree with it. I may say this isn't how I think it's going to be. But somebody who comes my way and says, why did you let all those unbaptized people who aren't going to take this seriously? So I could be criticized too.
But how do you know? But how do you know?
Well, when you go to a Catholic church, some priests will ask, and some won't. All right? So there's disagreement over that. So we could do a polarity over what's our value and how are we best managing that. And I don't know, again, and I appreciate Dog and Pony Show. That may be what this ultimately ends up being. But if the principles can help us, because I don't know if, let me do a different one. High church, low church. Do you know what that means? High church is super formal, liturgies, everything's a liturgy, everything's formal, genuflecting, clothing, vestments, high church, organ, or whatever their thing is. Low church, jeans and t-shirts, shorts, there's almost no formal liturgy, everything's extemporaneous, things are spontaneous, don't even have a bulletin, things aren't planned out, whatever. Churches can thrive and do with, so I think polarities might be, well, we manage our polarity over here, and this is our flavor. But there are other churches who manage their polarity over it. See, I don't know how Barry Johnson would see that, or these guys. But I think you can come to the place where this is what our culture needs, and it might not be the same. So that's why Episcopal Church is going to feel more like a Roman Catholic church, because it's more high church, typically. Now, you can find an Episcopal church that doesn't look like a church, but I'm saying that's a polarity that you can try to manage. So in our coming back to communion, Pastor Jim is pretty low church with communion. He doesn't do the Sursum Corda all the time. He doesn't do the liturgies in this order. He doesn't always place the Lord's Prayer here because we do it elsewhere. He doesn't, say baptized members only. It's pretty informal. He doesn't wear a robe. He doesn't hold the elements in a certain. I've seen a guy hold the elements in a certain way that I envied because it was so holy looking, the way he treated them. So there's a lower church, but then there's a higher church way. And the thing that has opened me to, I've been in these settings and taken communion, and it has blown me away spiritually. I have been in these settings, and it has blown me away spiritually. So
that's exactly what I was going to say, because just because it is a high church does not mean it is more inspirational. That's what, for me, that's why your communions mean a great deal, because you give time for the person to think about why they're taking, and it is a relationship between me and Christ. It's not so much about the verbiage, the fluff, the sequence of events. It's about true relationship with Christ, of what the essence of why we're doing communion. I get that with your communion. We've been in high churches and the Lutherans and everything, and it's so much about the formalcy of the going through it, that you lose kind of the essence of what it's all about.
not only with communion, but with a worship service. If you follow ritual in a certain way, there's comfort in that, and there's meaning in that. The downside is if it becomes rote. If I say the Lord's Prayer like that, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, let's get this over with, because I'm just going to say the words because I know them. Then there's no meaning to it. But the words remain this. So there's an upside and a downside. And I can value people who are comfortable on this end, even if I'm more comfortable on this end, because I know that there are upsides to both and warning signs and downsides to both.
Isn't that why people do a lot of church hunting? They go to find
Sure.
one that is comfortable with them, basically.
And praise God for God's grace. This is my body. The church is Christ's body in the world. This is my body broken for you. You broke it, but okay, that means we can reach more people.
Yeah, I was just going to mention from a personal viewpoint, I can go on and on and on about this church, but my brother had a small church in Reno, Nevada for several years. And the church membership, the ruling elders, if you will, not the congregation, told him what he should preach all the time. He says to the exclusion of the Bible. Because they didn't want to hear about the Bible. They wanted to hear about current events, what's going on in the United States and Russia and all that. So he stood as long as he could. So I quit. Because it's just casino owners, bank presidents, owners of big business, that's the only ones that actually attended the church. And they didn't want to hear anything about the Bible.
I wonder if this polarity would speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
Churches have to balance strong clergy leadership and strong lay leadership. And it sounds to me like they were trying to assert what they saw as the upsides of the lay leaders having a great deal of influence, but they were getting into the downside of when the clergy has very little, and it wasn't balancing well. I don't know how they would work that floor,
Yep.
but that's one that's in here. Nurture and transformation for members. Is nurture, we need to do that. We need to teach and grow, and even Paul uses metaphors like the new Christians are like babies on milk. But that's the nurture part of it that is absolutely essential. But then Paul gets to the point where he says, but now you need to be off milk, folks. You need to get about the transformation part of it. And it's difficult to balance that. And if you're like me, I tend to, personality-wise, fall into the bias and the problem or the difficulty. I want things to be nice. I am rewarded for niceness. I love niceness. I hate things that aren't nice. Sometimes you got to push the boundaries of not nice to deal with things in the church or in the world. Not in a way that's militant or whatever the case may be, but if niceness takes over, then I can nurture somebody their whole life and never help them transform. If I'm too uncomfortable to hold someone accountable or let them hold me accountable, it works both ways. I don't know. The last one that they had in here, I've told you this one before. The process of making disciples. Easy, challenging. All right, the way I've put it is church membership versus discipleship. Those are my two values. And I say church membership is easy, discipleship is challenging. They just have the words a little bit different. So I don't require classes. I love some churches that require classes and do them well, even for people that have been in church all their lives. And I've seen the good results of that. I've done some of those classes and had fun with them. They're very useful. But I tend to let that go, to say, well, we'll do that together. And that's my balance, and I get into the downside of being too easy. So we need balance on, we're not integrating people, we're not teaching, we're not answering questions, we're not providing some of those good things. So that's an area that I feel like I get off balance in. And part of it is because of niceness. So when I was dealing with the racial issues of the church in Muskegon, and they weren't the only ones, but it came to the forefront with them. The church in Muskegon desperately wants to be a multicultural integrated church. And they sincerely want that. why don't we have more people of color? They had 2 black members when I was there, and they both passed away. We want this. What's wrong with this? We invite, and we developed a great partnership with a black church in the middle of the urban part of it. We had a fantastic relationship together, but we weren't bringing in people of color. Well, a couple of things, and forgive me if I hope this is not unuseful, but this takes me into something that I learned about discrimination, prejudice, bias, when it comes to racial divides. And I don't know what the end goal is going to be, what it's going to look like, but I know that some churches have found a way to integrate culturally, and it works. But others have not been able to get there, or when they tried, it caused too many problems. Well, one of the things I've learned is that when I was a kid, the question that we asked was, are you prejudiced? Because we had a high Hispanic Mexican population in our town and in our school. And all of us, and I'll just take myself for example, well, no, I'm not prejudiced. I have Mexican friends. I don't have, and I was being truthful. At least I was being honest. Maybe not truthful because I didn't know the truth, but I was being honest. But I was only looking at it with what I call one eye, and that's intention. My intentions are great. I mean, my intentions are I want everybody to, that's where my niceness comes in. Out of 1 to 10, I'm a 10 in intentions. What I didn't know was the second eye, ignorance. And I learned some of that. I was overhearing a conversation about one guy that was upset, and he says, why do you call me racist? How am I racist? And the person of color who said, you're racist by the assumptions you make. And I got it when I was in Kansas, thinking, all these kids of color that come to our community college in this little Kansas town on scholarships to play basketball, why isn't this the most wonderful place they've ever come to? They could come to our church, for example, and be fed by people who would treat them as grandkids. They could get every meal free and be treated as celebrities. They would be embraced and loved. And I looked a little bit further. Why isn't this beautiful town that we love living in? It was Mayberry. Why isn't this the greatest place in the world for all colors? Someone said, "What am I supposed to get my hair cut if I'm black?" I had no clue that with just that one thing, that those are the subtle messages. You can come here and be like us, and we won't even know what your needs are. We'll have great intentions, but if we're ignorant, now that's just one thing. There are thousands of messages. And the church in Muskegon was sending thousands of subconscious messages that we want you here, but we're not going to understand or change for whatever is needed to do that. So that's 2 eyes. Seeing something with 2 eyes, you see it better. Well, as a kid, it used to be pejorative to say 4 eyes when you had glasses, but 4 eyes help you see even better sometimes. So there's intentions, then there's ignorance. Now, what am I on a scale of 1 to 10 for ignorance? I can't define that. All I can say is I'm further away from what I should be. I always have to be working on that. Then inheritance is the 3rd eye. What have I come into that I just accept that's how it is? The most stark example for me in that was when I was finishing seminary and putting my feelers out there, and I was on the system and getting inquiries from churches who, we'd like to talk to you. I had 85, I think. I mean, that was wonderful at the time to be able to, it was a hard process to winnow down, but that's affirming and wonderful. And I thought, that's great. Female colleagues who were every bit as smart and pastoral as competent, maybe 2 churches. I inherited that. I inherited a system that said, you look like a pastor. And God bless them, my parents, my step-parents, and others, it was hard for them to accept female pastors because of and it doesn't make them bad people, it's just so different. But I inherited that situation, so I need to be aware of that. right? And then that brings me to the last I. And I made up a word, I think, inaction. What am I doing about it? What am I doing about my ignorance? What am I doing about the inheritance that I have? Am I just content to leave things the way they are, or am I actually doing something about it? So now, and I sat in a place and the guy was up there giving the sermon. He says, how many of you here are racist? I raised my hand. Not because I intend to, but because I have a long way to go in educating my ignorance, a long way to go in acknowledging my inheritance, a long way to go in being proactive in helping things to change for the better. Now that doesn't make me, I mean, I can turn that into crazy activism or whatever, but it's just a way that I see myself a little with 4 eyes rather than 1 now. The church in Muskegon was only seeing 1 eye. And their intentions were on a scale of 1 to 10, they were a 15. They wanted people to come in. But when we interviewed candidates for a Christian education director, and there was a person of color who came in, her name was Arisha. She came to the interview and she was knocking it out of the park. And I could sense that. And I was there with the Christian education elder and 1 or 2 other people that were from the session personnel committee, and we're doing this interview. And we all knew that it was happening. You know, this is great. So I said, well, all right. So going forward then, let me tell you this: we're racist. Now, the 2 elders about fell off the chair that I just flat out said we're racist. She said, okay. And then I gave that example. I said, here's where we're at. Our intentions are wonderful. We're ignorant and don't know it. We don't know what signs we're sending out there, but obviously we're not sending welcoming signs. And she came on, and because of that conversation, it was one of the top moments. What a great thing that happened at that. The word racist is scary to use. I'm not as scared of it anymore to admit my part in it. And she didn't look at me as a terrible person because of it. Instead, we were on a place now where, okay, we're able to understand and work towards something that might be cooperative. I don't know if that's useful or not. I'm just pontificating some.
Intention, ignorance, inheritance, and
Inaction.
inaction.
Yeah, I had to fudge a little bit to get the 4th eye.
Thank you.
And on I did graphics for this, and on my scale of 1 to 10, it was, I can't remember if it was, I think it was the inaction one. I had a little bar line from 1 to 10, and 10 being doing something about it, 1 being doing nothing about it. And I had me put up on there represented by a rock or a boulder, and I had a little graphic of Jesus pushing against it as hard as he could toward the 10. So just to be humorous about it, or try and at least have a light attitude about a serious subject. Okay, so I've gone far afield of that. So I don't know if it's been useful, and we won't spend more time on polarities. Are you willing, we do have a little time, to listen to the justice mercy question? Sure. Okay. It'll take me just a moment to find it. We listened to that gentleman last week, and this gentleman, here we go. Let me pick it up here.
Made it with more than just me.
Thank you.
So I believe Jewel or Greg Thomas has a question.
Yes, wow, this is resonating really beautifully. Thank you so much. We're wondering about how you have applied this in D&I training.
We've applied it a lot, and we being somebody besides me as a white male with a lot of money, so we do it in partnership with with people who are part of marginalized cultures. And so the fundamental polarity there, if we look globally rather than just nationally, is the tension between dominant cultures and marginalized cultures.
Mhm.
And I suggest, and I write about this in one of the chapters of the book, towards the end, I deal with those issues in which there's a lot of tension and people might, when they first see it, sort of react defensively. I try to build a case that this phenomenon exists and it's useful in a lot of sort of organizational settings for leaders and organizations. Towards the end, I look more at those issues that are challenging, and poverty, racism, and sexism are things for which a polarity lens can be very useful. And so I talk about their stacking polarities. So what I can't go into it real elaborately, but let me just suggest that or thinking without and thinking is a root cause and perpetuator of poverty, racism, and sexism.
Mm.
And any effort to address poverty, racism, and sexism that doesn't explicitly and intentionally focus on polarity thinking is going to be undermined, unconsciously undermined. There's an unconscious bias for or thinking that undermines the effort to deal with racism, just like unconscious bias undermines the effort. So you have to have unconscious gender bias, unconscious racial bias needs to be brought up and front and center so that we can now deal with it, right? So does the unconscious bias for or thinking. So for example, here are some key polarities. The first one is or and in the first place. That itself is a polarity. If we assume that we have to deal with the issue from an or mindset and we take that to any polarity, we're undermined because it's not an or mindset won't work. For example, the first one, we have three, I'll talk about three natural desires which represent a pole of a polarity, which when focused on to the neglect of their sister, lead to poverty, racism, and sexism. The first is to protect. I want to protect my family, my loved ones, whatever. Now, the underlying polarity there is claiming power and sharing power.
Mm-hmm.
If in order to protect, I assume I have to claim power and can't share power, it leads to abuse of power, claiming power over, right? Now that leads to dominant culture and marginalized culture. So you have somebody dominating and others who are marginalized. The second one is to provide for. Now, the provide for dimension, of course I want to provide for, but if I assume that there can't be abundance for some and basics for all, I'll over-focus on providing for me, mine, or us to the relative neglect of the marginalized culture. So I create the marginalized culture in the first place by domination, then I perpetuate it for the same reason I got it in the first place, and in order to provide for my own, with the assumption I can't have abundance for some and basics for all. And the third one is I want to belong. And if we assume that we can't both belong to our group and everyone belong to all of humanity, what happens is, the desire to belong, by the way, is we look at wanting to be somebody who complies with the rules of my group. And so the way this shows up is we over-focus on obeying the rules in order to belong. And what this leads to is that the polarity is justice and mercy. When we over-focus on justice to the neglect of mercy, it leads to self-righteous abuse. So when you combine the desire to protect, to provide, and to belong without the other pair, it looks like poverty, racism, and sexism. And if you try to respond to those by just focusing on the other pole, it will not happen. You'll have the same kind of resistance that showed up in this company. And notice, by the way, in the company that I did the example with, there's no bad people here.
Right.
Matter of fact, they all agreed to go there. But if you assume, for example, in abundance for some and basics for all, if you assume that you can't keep your really nice house and allow for basic housing for everyone, you will undermine efforts for basic housing for everyone. And even people who are on boards attempting to provide housing for everyone will resist it. It's to be an unconscious resistance to the degree they assume in their head that they can't have both their nice house and somebody having basic housing. So that's how or thing without and thinking undermines all of those things. So yes, it applies a lot to the Jedi space, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion space.
Wow. I just want to thank you so much. I want to quickly say that your work and your body of thought is fundamental to one of the people and one of the books that I think is very.
I'll pause it there. Stop the share here. So again, I don't know how useful this has been, and if it's not been a good use of time, I apologize. I'm just very curious about that, and I'm thinking back to the parables that we've just studied. Can we see how they try to balance justice and mercy, not to the neglect of one or the other, but managing well? When we think of a God of justice, and yet if I'm a forgiven sinner, how is that justice? So those are theological questions that come about with that. And so Ken balances that with God reaches out to sinners who keep the law and sinners who break the law, and changes what the process is after that. But it doesn't neglect justice. It doesn't say that this is the right thing to do, so just keep doing bad stuff. But it also doesn't then neglect mercy as well. That's a complex understanding. So with those general principles in mind, I just thought I would throw this your way, and to whatever extent that it's useful for us going forward, great. I'm not expecting to invite Barry Johnson, if he's still around, or anybody here. And this has nothing to do with Bob Sheldon. This just came to my mind as a possible useful feature, since we're in the midst of getting some feedback from all the stakeholders. So, okay. Yes.
I don't think there's such a thing as information being not valuable. I think we can glean something that is valuable from everything. I mean, in every year that you are in the education, you have speakers that come before school starts, and it can be about racism, it can be about diversity, it can be about prejudice, it can be about how to value all stakeholders, how to unite the community, the children, be a triage for parents. You take information and it can be applied through, like you said, the one eye, the two eye, the three eye, the four eye. I mean, it's and then it comes back and it's like, okay, that's right. That could be an example here, as to that. And just like talking about the meeting, it wasn't, and I can't begin to tell you how it was random when you were talking about the acts. And yet that's probably been one of the most profound things besides the parables, that has stuck with it. So you're very humble in your presentations, so never get defeated, because you are on the chart for empathy, way off the chart. And I think that's one of the reasons that everybody enjoys you so much, because they see what a kind human being you are, and compassionate. So if you're looking for other items, because the polarity was interesting, and if it ever comes to that where maybe, holy cow, they want to say something, and at least we have an idea of what it is. The thing that is kind of weird right now in our culture, and I don't know if any of you guys know this, but having 3 kids that are teachers, it is thrown around all the time about the gen eds and the different generations that have different terminologies. And it's not just like if you were a baby boomer and you talk about yourself and you're born between. They actually have identifiable characteristics, and they pigeonhole, literally the children pigeonhole themselves, and they almost rationalize who they are, what they are, and why they are, based upon the perception of whoever has created this description of who they are in culture. It's weird, I've never seen this phenomenon before, and I am confused. I don't understand why our mores has created this, and our children are buying into it. And like, all they have to say is the X generation or something, they lack potential, they lack motivation, they lack a sense of identity, they're followers. My God, these kids are hearing this, and they literally, well, this is what I am. And that's sad. How did we get there in doing that, identifying in our culture of who you are based upon your birth date? And I realized that started with the baby boomers and things like that, but oh my gosh, that is weird.
I don't know the answer, but the cycle of change has sped up so much. It used to be that, we'd have 500-year cycles. Look at our lifetimes. How much have we absorbed, in communication and now artificial intelligence? And sometimes, I think, God, why are you giving us this information? We aren't caught up yet ethically to be able to handle DNA knowledge like we have, or atomic knowledge that we have. But it's God's timing, not mine.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, my brilliant four eyes, which is, I say brilliant with tongue in cheek, that was hard fought learning for me. It took a long time for me to come to that, and for me, that was enlightening. For someone else, it might be useless. My kids, when I explained that to them, why do you even need to? They were so used to living with different people of different color and cultures, they didn't need it. They were already there. Why do you need, why did this take so long? So that's great.
Well, just like last night when we went over to see Thomas, Max had his little, one of his little dogs, Tara, and Tara was, and I said something about, I called all of my girls, and I said, I used a pronoun, oh, look what he's doing, and he goes, Tutu, he's not transgender.
Oh,
Now, that, yeah.
11-year-old
But
just
I know,
turned
you
and
got-
already cognizant.
But you guys, you have to understand, in the school's education today, what is for you and I, like it's not to them. And so we as adults really need to make sure that we understand how to do this communication with our kids so that we're, it's very interesting. And like you were saying, our holy cow thing, how do we make sure that we're, as a congregation, holding tight to make sure we're doing what God wants us to do, and that we're learning what we need to do for, what did you call us, the in-reach and the outreach? We got to make sure we're on that together, and that we maintain that truthfulness, that trustworthiness with our relationship with God, that we do what we need to do to make sure that we're modeling that for our families, our children.
So Bob has given us guidelines for that as we meet. And go over the background of the synopsis. As we go over the expanded material, and he's given us guidelines for that. Here's the pitfalls, here's what we need to work towards, and that is going to, that is just the guiding principle of our meetings together.
Okay.
Yeah, and September it'll be rolled out, I think mid to late September it'll be rolled out to the congregation, who also will have an opportunity for input. So it isn't like this this vision group of 6 or 7 is making all these decisions. That's not our job. Our job is to get the session involved and the congregation involved.
I
don't know about you guys, but I have thoroughly enjoyed getting together on Wednesdays and just having a, I mean, this is like our own classes. I mean, and more people are welcome, absolutely. You know, like-
You're prejudiced.
Inclusive.
Mr. Larry wasn't here today.
But this is really just a lovely, you know, it's nice to have a forum where you can, it's a safety net, you can talk.